Hey everybody, welcome to Hope Frontier. This is Phil, and I'm really excited to get into today's podcast. We'll be taking a look at the book of Ruth. And since we're going to take a look at the whole book, I think it's best if you go part by part and kind of going through what is happening in the story instead of reading the whole thing and then just going back. So we'll be doing that, especially highlighting some important things that I think will be interesting for you and for me as well. And as we take a look at the book of Ruth, I'm really hoping that you can glean something new and see a lot of contention that's actually in the story that we might miss just by reading it at face value. So, we're going to get into it right now. Ruth chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and 2 sons with him. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife was Naomi. Their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in the land of Judah, and when they reached Moab, they settled there. Then Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah, and the other a woman named Ruth. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi alone, without her 2 sons or her husband. So, the first thing that we can see here is this takes place in the times of the judges. So what's the setting that's actually being put in front of us? At that time, there was a lot of unfaithfulness within Israel, but then they would turn to their faith and God would restore them. In the book of Deuteronomy, God clearly tells the Israelite people, if you are faithful with my covenant, then I will bless your land, you'll have abundance of food, it'll be safe, it'll be basically like a paradise on earth. So, since this happens during a severe famine, during this time of judges, this sets the stage that perhaps this isn't as faithful as a family as we would like to imagine that they are. If they were really faithful, then God would be blessing them, according to the covenant from the book of Deuteronomy. And we're going to take a look later about why we also think that this may be the case. So just keep that in the back of your mind that, hey, this may not be as this may not be an example of a pillar of faith that a lot of people expect Naomi to be. So in the story, this man from Judah moves to Moab. And this once again raises the question, is this man following God's will to move to Moab? Or is he ignoring God's will and moving because the grass is greener on the other side? Here, once again, we don't exactly know which one it is. I think it's ambiguous on purpose. Like in the book of Genesis, God asks Abraham to stay, but Abraham goes south. He doesn't trust God, and then a ton of problems happen with the different rulers of the nations he goes into. So is this the same thing? Is this mirroring what was happening in Genesis? Is this man, Elimelech, following God or not following God? I don't know. He's going to Moab. There are some problems. Moab has this relationship with Israel where they're tense neighbors. In the history of Moab, right, there was the lineage goes back to Lot. So there is some family connection there. However, 2 brothers in a family, sometimes there's tension and they fight. And so there's a lot of conflict between the 2 nations. One major thing was that in the country of Moab, they worshiped the god Chemosh. It is not the God of the Bible. It's not Yahweh. It's a different God. So the fact that Elimelech is choosing to uproot his family out of the protection of God's holy land and bring him to a foreign God's land, well, is he that faithful of a follower of God? Is he really that strong faith for an Israelite? We don't know. And so that is really brewing here in the back of our mind by the set of the story. So, what happens? Elimelech dies, and Naomi is left alone. So once again, we're already seeing that he's dead. So is God's faith in favor with them? Once it doesn't look like it, right? It looks like there's some problems here. How do we know? Well, the next verse, in verse 4, the two sons marry Moabite women. Now, if they were really faithful followers of God, they're not supposed to marry women who worship other gods. Later in the story, it's clear that they worship Chemosh. We will see about that later. And so is Naomi really protecting her family by allowing her sons to marry these Moabite women? It doesn't look like it. If she was really a faithful woman, then she would have said, no, you're going to marry an Israelite. You're not going to marry a Moabite. So it really makes us see, okay, this looks like actually a story we see a lot in our world today. There are many Christian families, and then their children marry people who have different religions or atheists. And a lot of times those parents may encourage it for some reason. Maybe they're very financially stable. Maybe they have some assets or something that looks good, or maybe they just believe in the power of love. So their faith might be not so powerful. And then what happens next in the story? 10 years later, both sons die. So Naomi is all alone without any male protector in her life. So we can clearly see, if we're taking a look, if we're really keeping our eyes on an Old Testament viewpoint, right? If we're putting ourselves 3,000 years ago, it would look like God's favor is not in this family. And we can see by their actions, they're not a really faith-filled family. They're doing some things that's questionable at best. But we're going to see how God is faithful even when people may not have the strongest faith. And I think that really adds a lot to the story here. If we take a look and just see that Naomi is this amazing woman of faith in the beginning of the story, it takes away a bit of her humanness. She is not this amazing pillar of faith. She is facing troubles. She doesn't have such a strong faith. And we'll see from Naomi's own words how she is very doubtful and negative when it comes to her God. Let's keep going in the story. This is verse 6. Then Naomi heard in Moab the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. With her two daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where she'd been living and took the road that led back to Judah. On the way, she said, "Go back to your mother's home. May the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. So we'll take a pause there. So we can see that in Israel, the people had repented. God is blessing them again with good crops. That's a wonderful thing. And here Naomi sees, and it probably shook her a little bit here, hey, the more faithful I am, the more repentant I am, God can restore his favor to me. And we would wish it'd be that simple, but her response to her daughters-in-law makes you wonder again what she's thinking here. So she says in verse 8, "Go back to your mother's homes." Okay? And this has a little bit of contention here in my mind. Obviously, the first thing is she does know that if these Moabite women come to Israel, they're going to have a hard time. Israelite people don't really like them. They don't have any, she doesn't have any children that they can get married to. And she doesn't even bring up the fact that there is this redeemer marriage system where the brother, if there's a family member who passes away, they can continue the male line. She doesn't even bring that fact up, probably because she assumes that no one's going to marry them. And she could be right, because who in Israel would really want to marry this foreign woman who worships these foreign gods when there's a lot of good Israelite women around them? So she says that to them, "Go back home." But then it kind of makes you wonder, hey, if she really knows that God is the one true God, despite the fact that she would tell him to go home, wouldn't she want them to come with her? Because then they could be blessed by the one true God. I mean, it makes you wonder, right? But at least she does see how the Lord is the giver of blessings. She wants God to bless them for the kindness. So she's very thankful. And may the Lord bless them with another marriage. So here you can see that, she has some faith. She's not a bad person. I think Naomi's not a bad person at all. I think she's probably good-hearted, but maybe doesn't understand the concepts of God so well. So they all break down and start crying. Let's continue with the story. So they say, we want to go with you and your people. And of course, Naomi replies, how can I give? How can you come with me? You want me to give birth to other sons? I'm too old to get married again. It's not going to happen. You're not going to wait for my sons, even if you are faithful. Of course not. And then we're going to just skip ahead. Things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. And again they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. So here, Naomi is really pleading with the girls, please take care of yourself. She's giving them the grace, the blessing, to just go and live a new life apart from her. And, in these kind of situations, it is confusing, it is complex to understand what is the right thing to do. But we can see that Naomi's attitude is turning a bit sour. She says, it's more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord raised his fist against me. Now, if you know the blessing and the goodness of God, he's not going to raise his fist against you. He wants you to come back into the family. He wants to be the one who's pouring out his blessing onto your life. God's plan has always been to use the Israelites to show the nations how good he is. But from her and her family's actions, from the way that she was living with Elimelech, you can see that she was stopping the favor of God to come into her life, into her family's life, by these actions that she's doing. And this is a common thing that we see in our world around us. People are angry at God because they experience some sorrow. God wants to bless people, but if they're not willing to follow in his ways faithfully, they're not allowing themselves to be blessed by God. And so they become bitter and angry. And it's not theologically correct. And I think the same situation is happening with Naomi. She's angry at God. God, why did you allow this to happen? Why did my husband die? Why did my sons die? I'm all alone. And God's probably saying, hey, Naomi, I wanted to bless you, but you left. You left your homeland. You went to this country, Moab, that worships other gods. You let your sons marry these women who are probably going to take their heart away from me. What are you doing, right? But we see that Ruth has a different heart. She's clinging tightly to Naomi. And really the heart of Ruth is quite shocking and quite amazing. But Naomi says to Ruth, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same. So here we can see that once again, it makes me wonder, hey, is it better to invite her into your home in Israel so she can worship the one true God instead of worshiping the spiritual evil of Chemosh? I don't know. She's really encouraging her, go back to your God, go back to Chemosh. A good example of this would be like if you come across this atheist talk show host who his whole show is about anti-God. And you tell him, hey, you should just keep doing your anti-God show and you're making good money and you know what? That's your future. It's okay. I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think the right thing to do is, hey, you should stop doing your show. I know it's a huge sacrifice, but God is bigger than you show. Because for Ruth, it's a really big sacrifice, and we're going to go into more detail about leaving her people behind and coming to live to Israel. So let's keep going in the story, verse 16. Ruth replied, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us." When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go, she could say nothing. So Ruth now really drives home just the goodness of her heart. At this point, we're not sure how much she knows about God. Obviously, we know that Naomi is not the perfect example of faith in the story. I mean, obviously, she worships God as her own God. So maybe Naomi has seen that character, seen the heart behind what she's worshiping, and has fallen in love with the one true God. That could be the case. I mean, we don't really know. However, what we do know is that her response is very powerful and actually very strong. She's going to move to the Israelite communities where she's an outsider, and she will always be an outsider. That's just going to be her situation. Obviously, she can, become a follower of God, which would be amazing. But she's not part of the 12 tribes of Israel. So it's going to be difficult for her. It will never be easy. It will always be hard. She's giving up her God Chemosh. She's leaving that behind in the past. Your God will be my God. So in this culture, a lot of the way they thought was that their God was territorial. So she's leaving her people, leaving her family, leaving her God, her protection, her favor, all of that, and trusting in this new God to rescue and save her. And probably the most important thing is that where you die, I will die, and I will be buried. And for you and for me, this is we don't understand the significance of this, because for those people, wherever you get buried, that's where your spirit resides until the resurrection. So the fact that she doesn't want to be buried with her ancestral people means that she's forever distancing herself from her family. I think a good example for you and for me would be, you buy a plane ticket to a different country, you fly there, and you never talk to your family ever again, and you never visit them ever again in your entire life. Could you do that? I mean, just imagine if you're 20 or 30, 40, even if you're 50, right? And you fly out to somewhere else and you never talk to anybody in your past ever again. That's what she's doing. It's amazing how much faith this woman has compared to Naomi. And she even says, "May God punish me if I allow anything but death to separate us." So she is very adamant and very strong, and God loves it. God absolutely loves the faith of this woman. And I personally think that this faith of Ruth really helps later in the story give Naomi that joy and that peace and that faithfulness in her heart that she needs. But we'll get to that later. So if we keep going on verse 19, they continue their journey. When they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. "Is it really Naomi?" the women asked. So these are small towns, and this was big news for them because this woman left when probably she was around maybe 15 to 20 years old. That's probably how old she was when she left. time she's coming back, she's probably around 45 to 50 years old. So it's been a long time since she's really coming back to live in Bethlehem. We don't know if she ever went back to visit. We don't really know that, but since they're very excited, it kind of makes it seem like they don't see her very often, if ever. So the women ask, is it really Naomi? And that's a really loaded question, because when Naomi left, she was very young, 15, 20 years old, full of excitement and joy as a young girl. Her name, Naomi, most likely means pleasant. So she was probably a very, very lively girl. But then when all these things happened to her in Moab, when she distanced herself from what God has, when she is making these decisions that don't bode well for the family, she starts to get worn down, right? And her answer in verse 20, don't call me Naomi, instead call me Mara, for the Almighty has made life very bitter for me. So what's her answer? It is so negative, right? I am not pleasant. I am destroyed. I'm bitter. That's what she's saying. She's angry at God. So once again, you can really see the faith challenge that Naomi's experiencing through the story. And you can see that her theology isn't really so great. It's really, honestly, it's like what we see a lot of times in our world around us. A lot of people have basic knowledge, and when they face hardship, they get angry. So she's angry at God. He made my life bitter. That's her response. I'm not happy, but God is like my enemy. And, we know that's not true. She says here, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer, and the Almighty has sent such a tragedy upon me? So here, she's not even saying that God allowed it to happen, but she's saying that God is the cause of it, right? The Lord caused me to suffer. He sent a tragedy upon me. So we can see here in the story build up so far, Naomi is facing some faith challenges. She's not this mighty woman of God. She seems like a very average Israelite person who has challenges, who doesn't have it all figured out. But we're going to see how God is faithful. We're going to see how God can change hearts. We're going to see how God can take something so small and actually transform it into something so great. And we're going to see how God can take the unexpected people like Ruth, who just until recently was worshiping a different God, and how God can take that woman and help bring blessing to Naomi. So even though the book is called Ruth, I part of me thinks that this story is really a story where we can see how those who are weak in faith, like Naomi, go through challenges, see how God can bring blessing and restore their faith, and just bring joy in their life, because God is faithful to his covenant. And that is really what the story is exemplifying and showing. And Naomi is a perfect example of how God is faithful to his covenant, even when there's challenges. Even when people aren't so faithful, God is. So the final verse, verse 22, Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by her daughter-in-law Ruth, the young Moabite woman. So again, the author driving home, hey, Moabite woman, not an Israelite woman. and they arrived in Bethlehem in the late spring at the beginning of the barley harvest. I'm already getting excited to see what's going to happen next, and I hope that you can see through this chapter that we're really putting a lot of backstory into it to help get us ready to see how God's going to respond to the Israelite people. Because just as the judges were experiencing challenges, the Israelite people were also experiencing challenges with their faith. But God is faithful to you and to me. So we're looking forward to see you next time as we go through Ruth chapter 2. Have a great one and go out and do something great.